Okay, and then Balázs, could you introduce yourself?
Hello. Yeah, hello. I'm Balázs. I'm the ecumenical officer of the Reformed Church in Hungary. So I'm based in Budapest. For some of, I mean, listening to your intro and getting aware that there are quite a number of people living in Budapest, that was surprising. For me, it's not, because I mean, I was born and raised in Budapest, and my role is to take care of the international relations of the Reformed Church in Hungary.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all for joining us. I'm really pleased, and it's really nice to see faces from, again, so many different parts of our history and our current life, our past life, and our future as we anticipate this move. If you don't mind, I'd love to open us in a word of prayer. Let's pray together. God our Father, we are grateful for this day and the opportunity to gather virtually in this space. And we ask that you would join us with your spirit, and that you would animate our conversation and encourage us and help us in sharing information and ideas and encouragement, better prepare for service, better prepare for the coming of your Son in what we celebrate this season. Now, will you give us clarity, and will you give us receptivity, and will you give us joy? In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so I'll give maybe a little more extended introduction of us, or we, I guess we'll give that. And then I'll switch to a PowerPoint, and we'll kind of go over some factual information about what's happening. And then hopefully we'll have plenty of time for question and answers at the end. So it's nice to see people like Corwin and Kurt here to help with some of this story. This story Kurt mentioned 1994, I think, and so the story in some ways begins there. At least there's several stories. One of the stories begins there, where a semester program began in the 90s, which is one of the ways that we got involved here. But there's another way that we got involved and interested in Eastern Europe, and that was in the late 90s. We worked at Gordon College in Massachusetts, another kind of a sister Christian college. And some of our very good friends there developed a dream and then a program, and now a life. They've been living in Romania since 1999. And we have been to visit them multiple times. In 2008, I took a Calvin interim group to visit them. In 2009, I went to a conference with them in Romania. And as a part of my travel back involved a train ride from Romania into Budapest with a young man who was a kind of a product of their program, which is in youth development, who had a scholarship to study at Northwestern College in Iowa. And he was about to spend the summer in Grand Rapids staying with us. And so Robbie and I got on a train and took an overnight train into Budapest, woke up in the morning at Keleti rail station. And my first view of Budapest was coming out of the Keleti rail station with this 19-year-old Hungarian Romanian young man who I was just getting to know. And we just had a phenomenal day. We were welcomed by a family there who also had a son at Northwestern, and they spent the entire day showing us around Budapest. I mean, they just drove us everywhere. We went to the theater, we went to a fancy restaurant, we went to the top of Gellert Hill twice, once in the morning and once in the evening. They just sort of pulled out all the stops to sort of convince us that Budapest was beautiful, and they didn't really even have to work that hard. But so I think that was the day when my heart, the seed was planted inside, where I thought, people get to live in a place like this. This is such a beautiful place. And I think at that time I already knew that I was hoping to direct the semester program. And my first application to do that was not approved. We had another faculty member named Bruce Berglund, who was an Eastern European historian and expert. And of course, he was selected over me, as he should have been. So I had to wait an extra 2 years, which turned out to be 2011. So in 2011, we directed the program and had a wonderful group of students. things went very well. And my reason for applying in the first place was twofold. One, to spend some time closer to Dana and Brandy, our friends in Romania, and two, to introduce another way of teaching and learning to the study abroad field, right? So study abroad is inherently experiential, right? There's some classroom teaching, of course, but a lot of the learning happens just by waking up in the morning in another country, getting on a subway or a tram in a language that isn't your own, and eating different food and experiencing life from a totally different point of view. And so it occurred to me at some point at Calvin that we had these two experiential learning programs, and they were both very successful, but they didn't really have much communication with each other. One was study abroad and sending people out into the world internationally. And the other one, the one that I direct, was local, mostly in Grand Rapids, service oriented, but learning through service. And I just sort of was convinced that these two should have more to do with each other. And so it occurred to me that we should introduce service learning in the international context. So my first semester in 2011, I brought that concept, and through a variety of very helpful Hungarians, I was able to develop partnerships for my 18 students all over the city, mostly in school contexts, because that made the most sense and it was the easiest for non-Hungarian speaker visitors to be helpful. And they were just, native speakers were in demand, and we had some. But the one that was most interesting was with the Reformed Church's refugee ministry, at that time called RMK. And Dora, who is still with them and may join us yet, I'm not sure, but Dora was our partner, and I got to know Dora Kanasai in the fall of 2011, was very impressed with her energy, with her creativity. You know, at that time, refugees weren't the political difficulty that they are now. They were already difficult, but they weren't quite as difficult as they are now. And so it was more of an interesting idea and an obvious place to do social service. And that placement went well. And so again, the seed of a friendship was born, and I very much enjoyed teaching the semester program and taking students to different parts of Central Europe. It's not irrelevant that Steve and Zanon mentioned that his wife, Chris, who had already lived in Lithuania and Romania before, was working alongside of me for 11 years, right? Chris has a heart for missions deep down in her being. And you can't be around her very long without knowing that, and without her challenging you to think about whether or not you might have a heart for missions. And Julie and I had spent a year in Mexico early on in our marriage. So we had some, we had dabbled in missions, I'll put it that way, for a year. So I'm gonna switch to my screen share so I can kind of follow my notes here, but stay with me, I'll keep telling this story. Okay. Let me know if you can't see that. But I'm going to switch to my second slide and talk about Kalunba. What's that? Okay. So, thank you. Helping me with presentation skills. Feel free to jump in.
I just don't want you blocking.
Yes. Okay. So I mentioned that RMK was our partner in 2011, and between 2011 and 2015, Balázs, feel free to jump in with correction here if I get some of this history wrong.
Okay.
But as I understand it, the church went through some period of back and forth on terms of the level of support they were able to or willing to give to the service of refugees, and it's a more complicated, I think, story to tell and do quickly, but the name of the organization changed, as I understand it, in part because the source of support or funding shifted to a more of an independent model than church sourced model. Is there a better way to say that, Balázs, in terms of how RMK became Kalunba?
No, I believe this is correct. So there has been reorganization throughout the years, sometimes because of lack of ownership on from the church, and sometimes because of other kind of considerations, like to have an independent agency as an implementing partner, opened avenues and resources coming from the European Union, for example. Okay.
Yeah.
But
Well,
go ahead, and I will give my short contribution.
Yeah, I should say,
Later.
as I understand, the main foci, or the areas of concentration for Kalunba, and before them RMK, are serving refugees in the area of language learning. Hungarian is a very difficult language to speak, and if you're going to live there, you need to speak it. Employment opportunities and housing opportunities. Okay, and as I was actually surprised when we did this presentation a week ago, Dora brought the history that the original focus of the work of serving refugees in Hungary was to serve Hungarian refugees. So these are people who find themselves they live in countries because of the Hungarian diaspora, because of the way Hungary has been divided over time politically, who come to the country of Hungary, which is now much smaller than it once was, in order to flee persecution or ways of life that aren't sustainable in places like Romania or Ukraine or one of the surrounding countries. And that shift from serving Hungarian refugees to serving refugees from the Middle East and Northern Africa and other parts of the world was also part of the, I think, shifting source orientation in terms of where the funding comes from. So in the 2011 to 2014 period, the source of funding shifted more to EU partnership with different churches and other organizations than the Hungarian Reformed Church. Okay, but now since 2015, that has come back into the orbit of the ecumenical office under Balázs's leadership. So there is a formal relationship between the Reformed Church in Hungary now again and the work of Kalunba. Okay, and so now I've got a couple of slides on the Reformed Church in Hungary, which there's no way to really tell this story quickly, but for those of you who come from a background connected to the Christian Reformed Church, one way to put it for us is to understand that these two denominations are both members of of some larger world bodies of Reformed Christians, like the World Alliance of Reformed Churches. Thanks. And
more exactly, World Communion of Reformed Churches.
Thank you. The WCRC, right?
Yeah, established in your premises in Grand Rapids in 2010.
Nobody invited me to. So sister denominations, but the Hungarian branch is much older than the American branch. And Balázs, do you want to give maybe a quick overview of the Reformed Church? And then on the next slide, I have some of the statistics from the website in terms of the number of congregations, but maybe just a brief overview.
Yeah, go ahead and show the statistics. I mean, in a nutshell, the Reformed Church in Hungary, for those who are not very knowledgeable, I would say that this is the largest, by far the largest Protestant denomination in this region, in the Central Eastern part of Europe. And this is a historic church dating back to the times of the Reformation. Actually, there was a second wave of Reformation coming from the Reformed Reformation coming from Geneva, or Calvin, who is we share this kind of tradition and history, actually, and roots with you, had an overwhelming impact on the country. So that at the end of the 16th century, that time bigger Hungarian kingdom became overwhelmingly Protestant, means Reformed, like 90%. And obviously through history and Counter-Reformation, etc., that has changed again, and now we are the largest minority, let me say, in Hungary. So the second largest denomination after the Roman Catholic Church. And you can see some numbers, so which are similar to some of your numbers, I believe, like 1,200 congregations. And the number of, to give a number, an exact number of how many members we have, it's utterly difficult, because the registration is done by the local churches, and local churches are not doing it the same way. So it differs, like it's a range between 350,000 duly registered members in the local churches and 1.1 million blaming in Hungary to be reformed but not belonging to the church. So we ended up to say that we have around 600,000 active members, family members included, etc. And it's an ancient church in a way. When we celebrated just 3 years before the 3 years ago, the 500 years of Reformation, we also celebrated the 450 years of the establishment of our denomination.
Okay.
So that's in short statistics. We have a lot of institutions. It comes with the history. Sorry, and I will finish it. So we had more than 1,000 schools or educational institutions before the First World War, because Protestant or being Reformed and also having schools, being very active in education. But it's you are familiar with this history.
Yeah.
So therefore we have a lot of institutions.
Okay, thank you. The one thing I might add, just for the American audience, would be, and I don't still fully understand this, but there's a way in which I think, because of the history and the long back and forth in terms of oppression and religious sort of control, there's a sense in which being Reformed in Hungary is sometimes as much a cultural identity as a religious identity, or it's sort of woven together, where you come from a Reformed tradition or you come from a Catholic tradition, right? Oh. And whether or not you identify as a believer is not always fully connected to that identity. Would that be accurate? Yeah. Okay.
I believe this is accurate. So it's also cultural and national identity combined. Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing that's been interesting to me, and again, I don't fully understand it, but is the way in which the church and its institutions are part of the government, right? Or are funded by the government in some part, in ways that seem really foreign to the American mind, with the separation of the church and the state.
Exactly. Yeah. First of all, the European model, with its variety of implemented forms, is already strange for American ears. In our case, we have a philosophy or a philosophy behind saying that church and state are strictly separated in a way. But as a recognized church, and we have more than 30 churches recognized by the government or by the parliament, you are eligible to run institutions. And once you establish an institution, be as educational or diaconal institution, providing service to citizens of the country, you should be dealt equally with the state-run institutions. This means that all institutions run by any of the denominations would get the same support, like financial support from taxpayers' money, like state or local municipality-run institutions. That's it. So that's the reality. I hope you understand the philosophy.
Yeah, that's helpful. Okay. That's a quick overview of the Reformed Church, and I should maybe back up just a little bit and explain why we're talking about the Reformed Church and Kalunba. I'm not sure if I did this overview. So Balázs is the director of the ecumenical office within the Reformed Church. And about a year ago, just as we were preparing to leave Hungary to come back to the States, at that time, the plan was for us to return again, teaching Calvin semester this fall. We didn't know that a pandemic was coming. But I was already having very strong feelings of, like I should be here. Like this is the place where we belong, and I would love to come alongside of the work of Kalunba. And Steve and Chris in Lithuania were helpful to us in discerning that there was a potential job description to be written using the connections that we have with the Reformed Church, with Kalunba, and with the university, Karol and Gaspar, which I'm about to explain. And so we sat down with Balázs for lunch. Again, it was right about a year ago, and asked kind of, if this went forward, would you be willing to be kind of the receiving partner? And his answer was yes, and has continued to be yes all through this year. So Balázs and Steve and I have spent a number of times on Zoom together, going through some of the details of that. And one of our early questions was, should the primary partner for a job for me be the university or the church? And I was really grateful when we had that meeting. I think it was back in April. It was really a unanimous, we had a meeting with Balázs, myself, and Gyula from the university, and we all agreed that it made more sense to be the church. Partly because the church is a larger organization that actually oversees the university as well. But so part of the work I will do will be in Kalunba. And the way I would describe that work is a little bit complicated, because I don't really know, to be honest. Like, the work will present itself when we're there. But as I understand what they need and what I can do for them would be in the areas of volunteer management and staff development. So maybe this is a good time to introduce Dora. Dora, Julie informed me that you're on the call now. Is that right?
Hello, yes, I'm here, and I'm sorry for being late.
Hi, Dora.
It's okay. Do you mind introducing yourself and a little bit of history with your work in Kalunba?
Oh, sure. I'm Dora Konizsai, and I joined the Refugee Ministry of the Reformed Church back in 2008. And nowadays, when we talk about refugees in Europe, we just have it in front of us that the question started in 2015. And I joined in 2008 because the Reformed Church already started its services in 2006. Debrecen is the largest Reformed city in Hungary, and it's also the city where the largest reception center used to be. So back then, the presiding bishop felt it obvious that the church has a role in reaching out and serving among the people who are still not having freedom of movement, and they are waiting for their permits, and probably in a lot of grief and stress. So back then, with the help of missionaries from the US and Canada, we started reaching out to refugees. And as these personal encounters developed, we slowly realized that not only the camp life is difficult, but moving out to the society will also have tremendous challenges. We are a country where to navigate as a foreigner wasn't easy, especially in the early 2000s, but it's still not much easier. And there is this great divide that our ministry before 2015 was a gradual response to constant crisis. When we developed our programs as we encountered what people need and miss, what are the things that the state is not solving for them, to find accommodation, to have healthcare, to have schooling and employment. On paper, all these things were available, but in reality, to really access and survive and have a decent life, all the bridges were simply missing. So we were trying to become the bridge and create professionals and finances to serve the people. But then after 2015, we were again in a crisis, because suddenly the political intention was to make life difficult for refugees so that they wouldn't come or wouldn't stay. And gradually the legal structure was taken apart, and now not even on paper do refugees really have service provided to them by the state. So not on paper and not really in reality. It's really depending on the churches and NGOs that people who still receive international protection and who can still become refugees, just in a much smaller number in Hungary, they receive enough support from friends and professionals to survive. And many of our clients actually become Hungarian citizens. It is possible. So the overall goal is to have the people have a enable them to rebuild their life and have a safety net that is even a passport, a Hungarian passport. And having you come, Jeff and Julie, as people who have known us for so many years already and who know the city and the country, and you really know how we work, who you have helped so many students be plugged into our ministry previously. It's I see it's such a rich start. You are not starting by learning, you will be already knowing so much. And all these years having experienced crisis, we are really knocked out, and a little your support and friendship and will really, I see that you will help us to be empowered again and find, we are downsizing our ministry because the needs have changed, but really to find a pathway where a smaller ministry with very, very strong roots and very strong determination can do efficient work is our goal. It was long, I'm sorry.
Thank you. That was perfect. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to move to talking about the university real quickly. The third leg of the stool for my work will be a partnership with Károly Gáspár, the university associated with the Reformed Church in Hungary, where our students have been studying since the 90s. And a brief history there is that Károly Gáspár has several different faculties. The theological faculty is very, very old, goes back centuries. The Christian Reformed Church has had a long history of association with Sarasvatak and Debrecen and the Reformed part of the country. And then in the late 80s, and there are probably pieces of this story that I don't know fully, but I know some of them, and Kurt and Corwin and maybe Steve and others can fill in some of the gaps. But a choir tour in 1988 formed a relationship with the translator, who was a young student, and I think she was attending the university in Debrecen, Dora, the picture on the left, Dora Chalet. And Dora developed relationships with the choir that developed into them returning to the States and figuring out a way to fully fund her to come to Calvin for a degree, right? So Dora graduated with a Calvin degree in the early 90s in art history. And has gone back now and become one of the better known art historians and curators in the Museum of Fine Arts in Budapest, and for many years has taught art history to our students while they're in the country, and really has become a good friend to us. The woman in the middle there with the students, Kata Kalai, is an American literature professor in the English faculty within the university, and since the late 90s has kind of been the liaison, the person to welcome our students. She teaches a very popular course on Holocaust literature, and she's just super friendly. She's also become one of our very close friends. And so what she's doing in this photo here is she has arranged for 3 students, this is in 2014, to come and do traditional Hungarian dancing in a classroom that was about 100 degrees, fully dressed like this, and 2 of these students became very good friends to our students that fall, at least, maybe all 3. And then the picture of the man on the right, many of you will know, some of you maybe don't, but Steve Vanderweel was an English professor at Calvin for many years, retired, I believe, in the late 80s, early 90s. And then in his retirement in 1993, he spent 6 months with his wife in Budapest, developing relationships and helping Károly apply for its charter from the government, And he told me many times the story of receiving news of the charter being granted and how exciting that was. And Steve arranged for, you know, a small library of books in English to be sort of developed and get the university started. And a picture of Steve hung on the wall in the office of the university for many years. What I heard between 2011 and 2014, that picture disappeared. And the reason was the woman who had been the secretary who knew Steve, when she retired, she took the picture home with her. So Steve was a very popular and very helpful, and he was also a very good friend of ours through Neelan Church and Calvin. But Cowley, in the 10 years that I've been associated with it, in 2011, I believe it had around 3,000 students. And as of last fall, it was 8,000 and growing, right? So Cowley is a university on the rise and becoming better and better known in Europe, and welcoming students from all over Europe, teaching a number of its departments in English and its courses in English. So they have offered me a place, sort of an adjunct kind of place within the Faculty of Humanities to teach kind of at will. Sometimes I'll teach, sometimes I won't. And it's a very generous offer, and I have already become good friends with many of their faculty, particularly in the English department. And then there's also a university pastor, Petr Bedekovic, who I didn't know until this spring, so I've only met him virtually. But he has also invited me to partner with his office as a kind of campus minister, right? To meet students in their questions of meaning making and the discovery of, you know, what life is about during and after university, which I'm excited about because it's sort of in keeping with kind of my professional identity and what I've done for the past 30 years. So that's another angle on the partnership. This slide is just a picture of Dora and I in Grand Rapids when she visited a few years ago and gave a talk at Calvin. And a few comments on, I mean, I've already mentioned some of this, but this notion of calling, going back at least a decade, has been affirmed in so many different directions, right? From friendship with people like Dora and Balázs and Kata and on and on. I really could go on and on, to partnerships now back here over the last several months. I should mention, when we returned to the States last December, our first time to church in January, which was at Neeland, our local church, Steve and Chris Van Zanen were visiting from Lithuania in their, you know, occasional visits to the United States. And we were developing this idea in our head, but they just happened to be seated right in front of us. And I was able to catch Steve before he was mobbed by well-wishers and friends at Neeland and arrange for a breakfast, right? And so since that breakfast in early January, Steve has been a shepherd to this process, right? Has used his expertise in mission development, missionary development, and his knowledge of the Christian Reformed Church and its missionary aspects, and helped develop the job description, helped us think about fundraising and support raising and network building and cultural transitions and all different manner. And this fall, we've started meeting weekly with the Europe team. So Steve Mishmerheisen, Steve Van Zanen are both on this call, as well as a couple in Berlin we're very good friends with, and people in Ukraine and St. Petersburg in Russia. So we've already begun the process of rooting kind of socially and spiritually with friends in Europe, even though we're still here. We also have a church family that we consider our second home church in Budapest, the St. Columba's Church of Scotland Mission Church. And you see, it's so great to see Jane on this call. Jane is a student from 2014 who now lives in Budapest. There are two from that group who live in Budapest, and we're eager to continue to get to know them and meet with them in their now adult work in the country. So I think I'll slow down and stop there so there is time for questions. But just a slide inviting folks to visit. One of the things that's been enjoyable in our 3 different semesters there has been friends from Grand Rapids or wherever visiting. We are moving toward considering Budapest home. And that sounds strange, and it also sounds wonderful, but that's going to involve some uprooting and then rerouting, and there will be grief involved in that, and visits will bring encouragement. I may have missed all kinds of things, but I want to make sure there's time for questions. So I'm going to stop sharing so we can see each other again and see if that raises any questions, or if anybody wants to fill in any gaps that I left in the presentation. Oh, I see others have joined us.
Hey, Jeff, I have a question. Now, I don't know if I understand this correctly, but here in the States, church and state are separate. So say, for instance, during COVID, the schools try to follow what the CDC recommends and all that, but we don't have to. Now in Hungary, they're not separate. So does that cause problems with the university and the school? And even with the immigration thing, does the government hinder what you want to do?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Can I offer my comments on this?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, there is still separation, and we are free to do whatever we want to do. But there is a huge pressure, obviously, and and all the institutions are very much dependent on the government or on the state's support, and therefore on governments who can even play with the support if they want. I mean, this has been a problem, but this is not necessarily a problem of the system. It's more a problem of those who are running the system, in Hungary. When it comes to immigration, obviously, that has been a huge, tremendous pressure on the church to even, give up the refugee ministry or this passion, which grew throughout the years before. Like 2015 proved to be a very critical year, not only because of what the European refugee crisis, where we had a lot of people.
Sorry.
But also because of the politics, which somehow realized and invented partly. That was partly they really meant it, but most of the time it was like more kind of a propaganda and how to keep power, and demonizing the whole migration issue. When I had to report about the situation in the year of 16, I was in the US because I served on the global board of global mission. I mean, I was a European representative on global mission board, ministry board, and I said, you can imagine what like Hungary, if you would have like a president like Trump in power. Now you had it. I mean, if it comes to the immigration policies, that was even worse in Hungary. I mean, it's really totally refusing the idea of migration and all kind of acts of hospitality and questioning, whether it is part of Christian attitude and Christian ministry to receive foreigners. So that has been a huge pressure, and that's why it's like keeping the refugee ministry operational is utterly important, not just for the refugees who are coming or are still living in Hungary, so that they have a safe space, so that they have to somebody to turn to, so that they have actual support, but also for the church to keep, this kind of gospel-based sobriety of what we are called to, how we can participate in God's mission, and also a clear sign publicly that there is a church who is committed keeps its commitment to the Ministry among Refugees. Exactly, and that's why all kind of cooperation, solidarity from the outside, international support is so important for in this regard.
Several people have asked about our status. So Julie and I, do you have any sense, like, in terms of us being considered missionaries sent from the US to Hungary, will that be welcome? Will that be problematic? Will that be something, that, how is that handled sort of in the sense of immigration for us? And yeah, is that a problematic identity?
No, that shouldn't be a problem. That shouldn't be a problem. So those who are vulnerable and dependent on, I'm really seeking refuge or asylum seekers, for those it's utterly difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, government is even sometimes supporting, at least hidden, in hidden ways, immigration in terms of working migration. But Dora is more knowledgeable in this, actually. So that shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah, great. Any other questions?
I have just one question. I've seen at one of your slides that you are gathering prayer partners right now. So I would like to ask whether I can become a prayer partner too.
Yes, Daniel, I'll send you information right after this call. Appreciate that. Yeah, definitely. I will already consider you a prayer partner, but there's a place on our website where I can kind of literally mark you down, and then you'll receive once in a while, you'll receive information from us. But thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Hey, Jeff, I didn't see the first part of the presentation. Sorry, I missed that. Could you, maybe you already covered it, what is your timeline? When do you expect to actually go?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Great question. And thanks for joining us. So the timeline is dependent on two unknowable factors. They're kind of predictable, but not super knowable. The COVID restrictions have to allow travel. And as I understand it, that's a little more complicated than just when Hungary opens its borders. I think there are some scenarios where we might be able to go while it's still, pre-vaccine, and quarantine 2 weeks and kind of live the way Hungarians are living. So I'm thinking that could be as early as February. And then the other is the support raising. So Resonate requires 100% pledged or in hand. And we're working hard on that. And many of you have already made contributions, and I very much appreciate it. And so we don't know when that will be completed. There's a scenario where December is, kind of a big giving month, and we enter the year close to fully funded or fully funded. Could delay. So we're hoping for February. We'd love to have a couple of months of language learning focus, because we could do that relatively quarantined, but it would be easier to do there. We've been working once a week since March, but once a week is not the way you want to learn Hungarian. So,
Jeff, what is the time period that pledges are spread across? Is that just for next year that people are pledging?
Yes. So as I understand Resonate, and maybe Steve and Zanon can jump in here, but in order to go, we've got to have 100% pledged or in hand for the year, right? So 2021, and then after that, right? So some of our gifts right now are one-time gifts, and some of them are annual or monthly, and we don't have to have, the annual 100, whatever our number is, but we have to have it for the first year, and then we kind of continue that over time. Is that correct, Steve? Would that be a good way to put it?
Yeah, I think that's accurate. So the experience of the mission is that if people get well funded for the first year, they're going to be well funded going forward. So people are not pledging, from now until the second coming. If you pledge until for the first year, that's excellent.
others.
Steve Van Zanen, do you have some inside information about when that second coming is going to happen? Because, you know,
I have been wondering if it's right around the corner based on recent events, but who knows?
Anticipating a question that has come before and recognizing that Julie hasn't had much to say. So, several people have asked about her kind of involvement in this, and I think I want to give her a chance to talk about what she'll be doing or what she does or doesn't know.
Well, unlike Jeff, I don't have a clear idea yet of exactly what I'll be doing. But in the beginning, I think we'll just be doing our best to adjust to a new life and figure out what that's gonna look like. But I'm open to different possibilities and certainly will be keeping my eyes open for where it seems like my gifts will be most useful. So we'll see.
It's a relatively giant life step, right? We had almost 19 years here in Grand Rapids, and it's exciting. It's a very clear calling, but it's also in many ways terrifying. So we want to be honest about that. We're eager to get there and get going, but leaving behind this house and stuff, and family and church, right? Those are big steps that are very sad in many cases. So.
May I offer a comment on this? We used to have as a church, I have been in office since 11 years now. Crazy. But we used to have this kind of pattern to have mission personnel, mission from different denominations in the US, like Peace Pastoral and then RCA. And we also have had mission interns, global mission interns from UCs in the past. So we have the experience, both positives, but also in negatives in terms that if it is not clear what we are doing together, if there is no clear vision and a detailed, working schedule or job description, then we wouldn't accept the approach. So that was our very first conversation with Jeff, when I told him, let us think about it and let us discern and really look at possibilities in Hungary, because I won't take the responsibility to say yes, to say you are welcome, if I don't feel like you will be in good place. I mean, you will be where you are called to be. And with Jeff and Julie, with both of you, I have good feelings. I mean, and we had very good conversation with our colleagues in different ministries and different institutions, that I'm pretty sure that once you are here, you will find your calling, and you will feel how tremendously you are helpful, not just with the presence. It itself can help us a lot, in a context where we live, where we tend to close down, even without COVID, close down the borders also in spiritual terms, to keep others away from our business, because we want, Hungary first, etc., etc. But all what you can offer in working with us, with the refugee ministry, who has been under huge moral and pressure and stress, or with the university where we have wonderful youngsters and very good connections to the outside world, etc., or even with Roma project. So if I wouldn't have been convinced that this is the right step to do, I wouldn't have accepted, your approach.
Appreciate that reminder. That's helpful. Okay. I want to be mindful of time, but if there's one last question, that's fine. Or feel free to reach out. We would love to have conversations directly, and I have already with many of you, which has been wonderful. So again, to those of you who are supporting us either in prayer or encouragement or financially or all three, we are very, very grateful and open to communication. We'll do our best to communicate toward you. I'm starting to feel a little bit like I'm over communicating, but I have to be careful. Thank you, Cameron, for that feedback. That's helpful. All right, then I think I'll call the meeting to conclusion, and thank you all for being here. And we really appreciate it, are affirmed and encouraged by your presence.